Okay, the little red light came on, so now I know we're on. So anyways, good to be back. And we have our draft person, legislative council person, Mike O'Grady with us. Margaret Lagus is also with us. And we're going to take a run through of 434. That's an H bill. It's the Agricultural Innovation Board. And so I guess, Michael, we had Kerry in yesterday in one of his assistants, and they, gave us a little background of where they were coming from with this. And so it'd be good to hear, how you put it together and how it went, say, on the health side.
Okay. Would you like me to share my screen as I walk through this, or do you all have a copy in front of you that you can review?
Actually, every time somebody shares the screen, I freeze up. So I don't like it to do that, but.
So we'll freeze Brian out.
Well, maybe could Linda, does it do that when Linda does it?
Whenever
Brian?
anybody shares the screen, unless I turn off my video, I can't hear anything and I freeze up. And we do have it on the committee page.
Okay, so I will just walk through it as though you each are able to review the text, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. No, that's fine.
So those of you who were on the committee last year saw some of this language or a very close approximation to this language when you were reviewing S-272, an act relating to pesticide management. You may recall, members on the committee last year, you made changes to the Vermont Pesticide Advisory Council, including membership, how often they meet, and certain other kind of organizational changes to the Vermont Pesticide Advisory Council. While you were doing that, the agency came in with a proposal to kind of convert the Pesticide Advisory Council from its statutory kind of limited, I won't say limited, it's specific function, and to basically expand the powers of a board, create a new board, retain the pesticide management authority under that board, but to give that board additional authority to review some of the kind of innovative or interesting issues that were coming up at the agency where the agency didn't have a forum for review of those issues. So that is what the Agricultural Innovation Board is. H434 would replace the Vermont Pesticide Advisory Council with the Agricultural Innovation Board. And so in section 1, the first change is that the board is being moved out of the pesticide chapter and being placed in the water quality chapter in the subchapter on regenerative farming. And that subchapter would be renamed the Regenerative and Innovative Agriculture subchapter. And then there would be a new section that would be added to that subchapter, 6 VSA 4964, to establish the Agricultural Innovation Board. The board would be created to review and make recommendations for prioritizing and coordinating all the recommendations that you are going to receive from multiple working groups, such as the Soil Health Payment for Ecosystems Working Group, the Vermont Climate Council, and other relevant recommendations. The board would also recommend practices that reduce the use and exposure to pesticides and synthetic fertilizers in order to protect soil biology, human health, and environmental health. They would advise the governor and the executive branch and the General Assembly with respect to legislation concerning the use of pest control measures and integrated pest management. They would recommend to the Secretary of Agriculture rules or legislation for the regulation of treated articles. And this is some subdivision that I think can be consolidated. The language that is referred to on page 2 of the as passed version is really just referring back to the standard for regulation of treated articles in 6 VSA 11, whatever 10. Does everyone know what a treated article is?
Is that something like Corey Parent?
I don't know. It's possible, but
You've stumped him.
generally a treated article is an item that has in its manufacturing been had a pesticide, fungicide, insecticide, etc. applied to it, and then that product after its application is marketed for use, either for that the application of the pesticide protects the product, or the application of the pesticide is going to have some control measure when it is in use. So the kind of
Corn.
vast array
Corn
of
Isn't most corn a treated article because it's all ready to go?
yes, some corn is, but the vast array of examples that I use is like a creosote treated telephone pole. That is a treated article. Your silver biocide underwear that has odor fighting properties, that is a treated article. So there's a considerable breadth of products that are treated articles. US EPA does not consider a treated article a pesticide. They consider the manufacturing process where the actual pesticide is put into the article to be an application of pesticide, and they regulate that, but they don't regulate the sale and marketing and use of a treated article after its manufacturing. A few years ago, you gave the Agency of Agriculture, and I believe Senator Pearson, I think you were the reporter of that bill, the authority to regulate treated articles if there was a determination that that treated article had a potential environmental risk or risk to human health that was particularly hazardous or had a long-term deleterious effect. So what the agency proposed is that the Ag Innovation Board will take over the VPAC's authority about recommending what's hazardous or long-term deleterious. In the drafting, I could have made this simpler and consolidated, and that's basically all I'm saying.
Yeah, Michael, are we sticking with just ag products in this treated articles issue, or is it going to take in underwear or telephone poles and all those things?
The way that the law currently is in statute, it is not just agricultural products, but that is why you build into it that the agency only has the ability to regulate those products that are hazardous or have a long-term deleterious effect, because of the breadth of the products that are out there, and because you don't want them trying to register sneakers or paint or things that have applications that make it a treated article, but if they're not hazardous or deleterious, you don't want the agency to be regulating that.
No. Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, and I understand that, Michael, but who decides whether they're hazardous?
Well, that's partly what the Vermont Pesticide Advisory Council does now. They review these products and make a determination of whether or not the state should regulate them. but in order for the state to regulate them, they either have to come to you as a body, or they would have to go through a rulemaking, which in part comes to you as a body as well. So there's basically checks and balances built into potential regulation of treated articles.
So that pesticide group, this is the first time I've heard about underwear and telephone poles. That group could have had jurisdiction over those articles as well.
They could have recommended to the Secretary of Agriculture to take action to regulate a treated article.
Wow.
We have talked about telephone poles with, with that are treated. I don't ever recall dealing with sneakers and underwear, but but this new innovation board would also have that same authority to
Yep.
review and bring to,
So this Ag Innovation Board is going to assume VPAC's, the Pesticide Advisory Council's authorities and duties, but it's going to have expanded authority and duty, and it's going to have an expanded, or I should say, a revised membership that is not heavily focused on state regulatory agencies, the way that VPAC is heavily regulated in that way. And that's one of the things you looked at last year when you were looking at 272 about adding some additional interest into the VPAC board. This bill 434 does that, moves several of those state entities off the board, and brings in more farming interest and some other expertise onto the board. So let's talk about some of why they're bringing some extra expertise or different people onto the board. Because some of the additional authority of the Ag Innovation Board is they're going to recommend practices to reduce the use and generation of waste associated with agricultural plastics. They're going to try to incentivize farming practices that look to reduce the use and dependence on pesticides. They're going to advise the agency with regard to the regulation of biostimulants. And you all went through the biostimulant discussion in S102 about what it is. The board would also recommend studies necessary for the performance of its function, and it would explore developing standards for a Vermont agricultural marketing program that sets standards for carbon capture, plastic use, and organic product selection. So it assumes VPAC's authority, but it has additional authorities as well. And therefore, the board is changing. The Secretary of Ag convenes the board. The Secretary of Ag appoints the members to the board. There are 14 members on the board. The Secretary of Ag is one of them. Then there's a member of the organic farming community, a member from UVM Center for Sustainable Agriculture, the Agency of Agriculture's head of their agricultural chemical program, the Agency of Agriculture's water quality program head, the Commissioner of Health or designee, the Secretary of Natural Resources or designee, a soil biologist or certified crop consultant, a member of the public representing the dairy industry, a member of the public representing the fruit and vegetable production, a member of the public representing non-dairy livestock farming, a member of the public knowledgeable in agricultural water quality management, and a representative from an organization involved in land conservation, and then last, a representative from an environmental advocacy organization. So who is not on this board would be the Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife, the Commissioner of Forest Parks and Recreation, the Agency of Transportation, all of whom were on or currently are on VPAC. And so that's That's one of the significant changes to the membership. You don't have those state entities that either apply or manage pest as part of their jurisdiction.
So are there any qualifications with the different organizations that like, you know, they have to be knowledgeable of these things that they're going to be regulating?
No. And first, let me say that this board is not going to be the regulatory board. They are an advisory board. They advise the secretary and the governor and you regarding what should be regulated or legislated about. They don't have independent regulatory authority, but they make recommendations as to what should be regulated.
Yep. Brian and then Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also noticed, Michael, there's no mention of a dairy farmer. There's a member of the public, but that doesn't necessarily mean that person is a dairy farmer.
Right. It's a person that represents the industry, a member of the public representing the dairy industry. That could be it could be one of the co-op leadership. It could be a person who runs a yogurt plant. It could be someone like that, or it could be a dairy farmer.
And yet there's a member of the farming community who practices organic agriculture.
That is correct.
So to me, it doesn't necessarily even out. But.
Well, in putting together the draft of this bill prior to its introduction, the agency worked with multiple interested groups. And when you work with multiple interested groups want to be represented in what is created. And so I think you see some of that in the membership of the board.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Collmore, I guess as I read this, a member of the public representing the dairy industry in Vermont could be a processor, I guess.
Yeah.
Or a farmer, whereas in the organic, it's just a member of the farming community. So, I mean, you could make it a parallel pretty easily, but in the dairy, we have a big dairy industry. We have organic farmers, right? That maybe that I don't know, but maybe that's part of.
Well, we have a more open mind than the House has, so you know we can work on that, the board.
Michael, I was just curious at the top of page 5. It says a member of the public knowledgeable in agricultural water management. Did you mean is
it probably should be in knowledgeable in agricultural water quality requirements. It's probably a better terminology.
Yeah, because there's a lot of ways that could look. So, all right, thanks.
Mike.
Yep.
Are you finished, Chris? Okay, Corey.
Michael, would this committee replace any other committees in the Agency of Ag and take over other jurisdiction? Is there other overlap that the House considered here?
The potential overlap is probably with the ecosystems incentives working group, but remember is only going to be in existence for, you just extended it another year until 2023, I believe. So that's really the existing overlap right now, but that overlap goes away in 2023. And that's within the agency. Now, there's potential overlap with the Climate Council because the Climate Council is going to be looking at agricultural management measures as part of a way to reduce the climate impact of the state. And so there's potential overlap there. Part of what this board would be doing would be recommending how to prioritize recommendations from an entity like the Climate Council that is outside of the agency.
Oh, okay, Corey. Okay, Michael, I guess continue on. Anthony has a question.
Remind me, Michael, it's that all these people are appointed by the Secretary of Agriculture?
That's correct.
I mean, because it does seem heavily weighted towards the towards agriculture agency. I also wonder whether we shouldn't consider having someone, if we're talking about the impacts of pesticides and whatnot on food and land, it seems like there should be somebody who has experience in just human health aspects of what's going on with the pesticides. Not saying it's not a question, it's just a thought. If
I could respond, that's a good point, because VPAC currently has a representative from the College of Medicine at UVM that is supposed to be knowledgeable in the effects of I'm just going to use the general term pesticide on human health. I think the problem with VPAC is I think the agency had trouble getting that person to actually come and participate.
Yeah, actually, I think I remember hearing about that.
Yeah.
They're having trouble with that. Also, Michael, what is it says a soil biologist or a certified crop consultants. I think of crop consultants as people who go to your farm and try to sell you chemicals and pesticides and stuff like that, genetically engineered products, you know. Am I correct in that thought?
I think that's part of what a crop consultant might do. Crop consultants these days have significant skills and provide a broad array of services. They may recommend the use of certain fertilizers or pesticides or certain treated article crops, but that's not the only thing that they do. They might be there for nutrient management. They might be there for water quality. They might be there for rotation. There's a lot of things that a crop consultant could be doing.
And finally, if we're talking about essentially eliminating the Pesticide Advisory Council, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that the Pesticide Advisory Council did stuff around permitting for use of chemicals on rights of way and that kind of stuff. And will that be happening? Who would be doing that work under this scenario?
So they technically don't issue the permit. They review the applications,
right,
and then recommend. That is not explicit really anywhere in statute that they do that. It's just something that they have been doing. It is intended that the Agricultural Innovation Board will be the entity that will do that in the future.
Okay, thanks.
Is that written in there, Michael, that makes it explicit that they would do that?
What is written in is the authority in which the Pesticide Advisory Council does that under in Title VI is amended, so it is transferred to the Agricultural Innovation Board. It is one of the later sections where there's conforming amendments made, changing VPAC's authority to the authority of the Agriculture Innovation Board.
Yeah. And, guys, as we move forward with this discussion this morning, jot your notes down so that when we do go through the bill, we'll have that information, and you'll have it to present. Okay, Michael.
Okay. So the members are appointed for 3-year terms, and they are only supposed to serve no more than 2 terms, except if they're ex officio, except if they're like a government employee that's being that's appointed to the board by nature of their office. They're going to get compensation and expenses, which VPAC currently does not receive. Well, I should say VPAC gets expenses, they don't get the per diems. So the House wanted to change that. The money would be paid out of the pesticide monitoring revolving fund. The agency has testified that there's available funding in that fund to pay for that, and the authority of that fund extends to duties involved by the agency in the regulation of pesticides, which this would involve. And then you get to the powers and duties of the board. They're going to issue a report annually to you that recommends policy solutions to assist farmers in reducing use of and exposure to pesticides and use of innovative or alternative practices. They're going to propose an annual budget for any of the ideas that they identify and recommend in their annual report. Then they're going to survey farmers for every county in the state to help better understand the current agricultural landscape, as well as current challenges for farmers in order to better inform recommendations.
What was the last thing again, Michael?
They're going to survey farmers throughout the state to help understand the challenges farmers are facing so that they can better inform the recommendations to you and to the governor.
The board is going to do that, or?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I'll put a question mark by that one, but
Okay.
go ahead.
So with that, you are finished with the section that creates the Agricultural Innovation Board. You move on to section 2, which is the repeal of the Pesticide Advisory Council. That repeal would occur on January 1, 2022. Then you come to section 3, and this is the beginning of the conforming amendments. And the first conforming amendment is to the Mosquito Control Authority. Currently, VPAC recommends the acceptable products and methods for use of mosquito control applications. And so section 3, 6 BSA 1083A5 would transfer that authority from VPAC to the Agricultural Innovation Board. Similarly, in section 4, this is 6 BSA 1103. This is the Secretary of Agriculture's general authority to regulate the control and use of pesticides in the state. And currently, the VPAC is supposed to provide advice to the Secretary, and the Secretary is supposed to act upon that advice in the regulation and control of pesticides in the state. That authority to provide advice to the Secretary would transfer from VPAC to the Agricultural Innovation Board. Again, a similar change is made in section 5, 6 BSA 1104. This is the specific powers of the Secretary to regulate pesticides. The first change was VPAC recommends to the Secretary those records that pesticide applicators, sellers, dealers, etc., need to keep for purposes of regulation and management of pesticides in the state. So that authority of recommending what records to retain or maintain is shifted from VPAC to the Agricultural Innovation Board. Also in that same section, the Secretary has authority to adopt rules for the control of pesticides in the state. And he is supposed to do that with the advice of currently VPAC. That requirement about the advice would shift from the Pesticide Advisory Council to the Agricultural Innovation Board. Again, similar change, conformity change, section 6 BSA 1105A. This is the section where the agency is given authority to regulate treated articles. The Secretary of Ag is only supposed to adopt a rule regarding treated articles upon the recommendation of VPAC. And so that recommendation would be shifted from VPAC to the Agricultural Innovation Board. And again, the standard for if a treated article should be regulated or recommended for regulation is that the Agricultural Innovation Board has determined that the article will have a hazardous or long-term deleterious effect on the environment, presents a likely risk to human health, or is dangerous. So your sneaker, unless it's somehow dangerous, is not going to be subject to regulation. It has to be something that meets that standard. And this has been in law for about, I think, 4 years now. And they have not yet regulated a treated article, or even recommended, to my knowledge, regulation of a treated article. And then you come to section 7, which is a implementation transition section. This just provides that the Secretary of Agriculture shall appoint the new members to the Agricultural Innovation Board by January 1, 2022. And that is important because that is when VPAC is repealed. And so it's intended that there will be no gap in regulatory authority or functioning for the regulation of pesticides. It will shift from VPAC to the Ag Innovation Board on January 1, 2022. And that's the bill.
Michael, why are all the different sections dealing with just moving a particular item from VPAC to the board, VPAC to the board? Why aren't those all looped together and under one section?
I could have done that. I could have done that, and I could have done it really easily, but it doesn't show what is actually being changed, right? I could have just said Legislative Council and its statutory revision authority shall change the term Vermont Pesticide Advisory Council, the Ag Innovation Board, where it appears on the following statutes, and you wouldn't have seen what was really the subject matter of those changes. It would have reduced the bill by about 4 pages, but you wouldn't have actually seen what was being changed.
Yeah. Well, this is, it's not a major change, but everybody should at least be able to see what it's doing and read that. And so I guess it's good that you did it the way you did it. Brian?
Thank you, Bobby. So Michael, if we can go back, if you can scroll back to page 7, line 7, and this is sort of an English question, I think. In the performance of such duties, the secretary shall act upon the advice of the Agricultural Innovation Board and subject to the approval. Does that imply that the board is telling the secretary what to do?
So that is not how the agency interprets that language. I've had discussions about that in the past, about whether or not the secretary needs to have the advice of the VPAC in order to go forward. They don't believe that that's the case, but in practice, that's what they have done. So it can definitely be read to that mean that it's not read by the agency in that way, but it is actually implemented in that way. I will note that in the treated article section, where it says that the secretary may adopt rule upon the recommendation of currently VPAC, it was your intent, and it was drafted that way, that the secretary cannot adopt a rule unless there is a recommendation from VPAC or, under this bill, the Ag Innovation Board, because you wanted the experts to be making that determination if there's harmful, dangerous, deleterious, etc., before the secretary went forward. You didn't want it to be a political decision. You wanted it to be a scientific decision.
But we've since, if this goes through, changed the complexion of the board, in some view rather substantially. So I guess I'm just questioning whether we want, in essence, and I don't know if it's a citizen board, but, other people to make rules and regulations and not the Secretary of Agriculture. That's all.
Well, technically, the board won't be making the regulation. The board will be making the recommendation for the regulation.
Okay.
And so the secretary still would be the one that would issue the rule, but would have to be upon the recommendation of the board.
Okay, so.
But I understand your point, Senator Collmore. It's a valid point.
Okay, thank you. I'll mark it down.
Other questions at this time from Michael? Margaret, would you like to tell us what you think about 434?
I would. For the record, I'm Margaret Lagus, and on this issue, I'm going to kind of tag team two clients. I represent the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, and I also represent Agrimark, the dairy cooperative. Both of those groups support the idea of setting up an agricultural innovation board, predominantly because this is a more holistic, one-stop shopping way of looking at the rapid, unbelievable changes that are taking place, not only in American agriculture, but more specifically on Vermont farms over the last 5 to 8 years. You heard from Agrimark farmers about how rapidly they're adopting some of the research that UVM is doing, that Vermont is literally leading the way on many, many kinds of innovation on our farms, and that Vermont farmers are enthusiastically embracing some of those changes and really trying hard to adopt some of this novel way to look at farming. There have been some very, very rapid changes, and Vermont farmers are doing a lot of precision agriculture, a lot more field scouting, a lot more using GPS and satellite technology to help them both reduce their inputs, but also better create more healthier and more abundant crops on the fields that they have. There's just so much research going on. It's kind of hard to keep up with all of it. And we think that a board like this has a better way to kind of grapple with all of that, and to have a variety of farming types on the board is also really helpful, because sometimes one pesticide may look like it's really not that necessary if you're a dairy farmer, but if you're a fruit and vegetable farmer, it could be kind of life or death for some specific virus or fungus that you have that just doesn't affect dairy farming. So to have kind of a broader perspective on the producers, we think is really important. We also just want to emphasize that this board is going to continually look at ways to help farmers reduce their inputs. All of these products are really expensive on farms and for farmers to buy. And so we want to use them as efficiently as we can. Obviously, that only benefits the environment. It benefits our back pocket. And that's where some of these crop consultants come in, because they come into our farms, they do a lot of the scouting for us. We don't have time sometimes to be out in all of our fields and figure out where things are. They know a lot about just exactly how much pest pressure is actually going to affect our yield, versus just us walking out and seeing a bunch of bugs and being like, oh, I better spray over there. They'll know that unless you have a certain number of those bugs within a certain area, then spraying is not only not economical, but we can save you money, because it's not going to really affect your overall production in that field. And that's really what we care about. We want a healthy crop, and we don't want to put products on it that we don't need. And we think that this board is going to be able to better look at all of those issues all together. We also appreciate that it's going to meet 4 times a year. It's going to be required to come out with an annual report with recommendations. They're going to reach out to farmers. You kind of wondered about that survey. It is hard to get answers from farmers sometimes, but I do think that right now, dairy farming in Vermont, and probably many other kinds of farming, is kind of like farming from a fire hose, because so many changes are taking place that maybe a survey would be helpful, and just be like, how many more innovations can you possibly add on to your daily chore list? And so I do think that reaching out to farmers and finding out, are you kind of at the maximum of what you can take right now, or, how are all of these changes feeling to you, and how are they working on your farms? So we think that with all of the efficiencies that are going on out there, that having a kind of one-stop shopping, one board that's going to look at all of these various different issues and look at them in a really holistic way as to all of the inputs and all of the outcomes of those inputs being used in Vermont, along with all the different practices that farmers are using, is really an important change. One of the things we would say is, Senator Parent asked a minute ago about whether there are any boards or commissions that might not be necessary anymore. A couple of years ago, you set up a seed trait committee to look at new GMO seeds coming into Vermont and potentially some of the pesticides that get used on them. That board was set up. It was mostly the people that would be either selling the products or competitors of those selling the products. I think this board is a much better place to look at those issues because they'll be looking at it in a holistic way. Is that GMO seed trait going to be something that's really important for Vermont farmers? Or is the additional use of that particular pesticide really something that isn't necessary for us or doesn't necessarily improve the overall outcome of agronomy in Vermont? And that's something that I think UVM looks at all the time as to whether or not some of these treated articles are important for many kinds of water quality issues. They're vital. We really can't do it without them. But maybe there are some that are unnecessary. And so we think that this innovation board kind of looking at it in the whole is a much better way of handling those issues.
So that sounds like your crew then is supporting this. I know we've taken quite a lot of testimony or heard different testimony, and even like the spreading of manure, how lime and fertilizer, how they're all run off a satellite and the equipment's all set up to add more, take some, do less. It's amazing what is happening out there on the farm and farmland. Are there questions from the committee to Margaret?
Well, I'll just tell you one more quick little thing, and that is that my daughter works for a company that handles large endowments and investments. And if you want to think about how rapidly some of these changes are coming, they're actually doing a podcast on precision agriculture because there's so much money right now being spent on the technology used in farming because the sellers like Nestle and Procter & Gamble and other companies that buy food have customers that want changes and want farmers to do things in certain ways. So there was a ton of money coming in to do the research and innovation on precision agriculture and inputs in general. So things are, if we think things have been changing rapidly in the last 10 years, wait for the next 5 years, because there's a lot of money coming in, not only in buying up farmland because they are worried that we won't have farmland anymore. There's too much housing pressure. It's scary and hopeful.
Yeah. Well, I think it was last night on the news, they showed a tomato grower down in Kentucky with everything growing under glass. And I mean, not a spoonful of dirt in the building, and the tomatoes were rolling out of there wide open, as fast as they could pack them.
Amazing.
No. So are there any other questions from the committee members for Michael? What I would expect and hope is we probably will put this bill, on notice so that we will keep working on it. In the next couple of weeks, hopefully we can, get this done up and moved out back to the house or whatever we decide to do with it. We have Julie Moore is coming to talk to us in regards to this. But she can't make it until 11:30. So I don't know if there are any other questions if there aren't any others for Michael or for Margaret. Or if you'd like to have Michael look anything up or do anything for us in the meantime, be a good time to ask. Chris?
Just Michael, a question on the bill. I want you to check my memory. The Pesticide Advisory Board, in theory, had it was sort of advisory, but it was sort of regulatory. But Kerry, I recall, testified that basically he was the regulator, and if to the extent there was a regulatory function in the current setup, it was carried out by him. Because I'm, I happen to like Kerry, and he's a good person, but he's a person and in a position, and the position, I'm always leery when we assign comfort to the current holder of the position. So can you just help me understand that? Because it does sound like a pretty significant change, even though it's not actually changed to the current practice. Can you help me sort that out?
So I would agree. Well, let me back up. The regulator is not Carrie. The regulator is the agency, and more broadly, the state. The regulatory authority is more than just the rules. It's inspection, enforcement, etc. And all of that authority is invested with the agency. The agency is the one that has the authority to inspect. The agency is the one that registers. The agency is the one that does the labeling requirements. The agency is the regulator. The Pesticide Advisory Council is intended to provide the input and expertise of those persons that use or have knowledge of pest control measures. And when it was initially enacted, it's so heavily state government employee represented because its initial function was to recommend how pesticides would be used by the state, like by AOT or by Forest and Parks. But it has expanded beyond that, and logically so, because pesticides are really ubiquitous. You don't realize how present they are in your life. When you go wash your hands, you are likely not washing your hands with soap. You are likely washing your hands with a product that has a pesticide registration number, because of what it is it claims to do. And so it's something that it makes sense to have a board advise the regulator on what to do. And as Margaret just testified, that there is so much that is happening, both with pest control and with farming in general, that the agency needs a forum. And the concept is that, well, maybe this new forum can do both the pest control advisory function and the innovative agricultural function.
Thank you. So, but it's not, so that all makes a lot of sense. Is there a shift in power that is being considered here from a board that today could say, no, we don't want this? They don't do that, but they could say, no, we don't want this. And then the agency through carries that out. That's part of what I'd like to understand. I agree with everything you've described, but is there a fundamental shift that we're making? And it's not to say we should or shouldn't, but I want to make sure I understand it.
I don't think you are making a fundamental shift. I expect there are interested parties that, or maybe even members of BPAC that think that what they say goes, right? That if they advise the secretary that certain records need to be maintained, that will happen. But that is not, and that may have been the practice, but that is not the law. You know, it just says that the BPAC advises the secretary on what records need to be retained or maintained. It doesn't say BPAC sets the standards that the secretary shall require. That's different. That's a different standard. The one place where I think BPAC has that kind of on-off authority is for treated articles, and that was your intent. That was the legislature's intent. And so otherwise, I think they are advisory in nature. They may not think so. That's their prerogative, but I don't believe that is the law.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
Any other questions for Michael? I was talking last evening, I was chatting with my brother who lives in Florida. And, you know, we were just talking in general about different things. He said, well, tomorrow I've got to kind of be around because the pest control people are coming to spray my lawn. And I said, well, yeah. Oh, yeah. He said, yeah, we contract out with this outfit, and they come in and every month they come and do something with lawns, and, you know, put stuff on them or no stuff, depending on, I guess, how they test out. But I think our people are getting more and more into that right here in Vermont in the summer, having lawn care people come and check and do certain things to their lawn. And so this new board would certainly look after that, I'd presume. I know we talked about stuff like that in the past.
So those companies, and they are definitely in Vermont already, and they've even kind of evolved. Now there's natural ones, but they need to be licensed applicators in order to apply the pesticide, and all of their products need to be registered with the state, and they may only use products for their intended use according to the label on the product.
Do they have to do any type of testing like we do on farms, like for nutrient management? They must test those lawns and things to see what they're lacking.
I don't know of any statutory requirement for them to test. I could look at the pesticide regulations. I don't know. I would have to look at that. In addition, the label might have provisions that would effectively require them to test, you know, only use in certain soil conditions, etc.
Yeah.
But that's not going to be on every product.
No.
So I would have to look at the agency's rules to see if they have a testing requirement. But I don't want to say what my intuition is, because I just don't know.
Not that we have time to do this, but sometime it would be good just to see, have Carrie bring us over. They must have to stores, home goods stores and like Home Depots and Lowe's, and they must have to keep track of how much fertilizer they sell. And it'd be interesting to see how many tons people go to those kind of places and buy versus tons that go to like Bordeaux's and Laws and the more agricultural places, to see what the just to see what the comparison is in tons sold for private use versus for farm use. But anyway, any other questions for Michael? If not, thanks a lot, Michael, and we'll try to get you back on the schedule sometime maybe early next week to work on this bill and hopefully a couple of others.
Okay. Is the committee doing S102 on the floor today?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll be watching, and I can, if questions can come up, I will. Well, I don't know what your protocol is about having access to electronics, but I will email responses or if there are any questions or information regarding questions.
I was going to ask about that too. Obviously, when we're in the room, we can ask for recess, and the lawyers are behind us, and you can quickly ask a question. Nobody's done that on any bill yet this year that I can remember. And if they do ask for a recess, I think we're still on YouTube. So it's sort of like, how do you ask the question if you're not in the room?
Chris?
Well, you can, last year when we were doing some of the harder stuff, Michael was emailing me answers as they were surfacing, but you could always call, ask for a recess, turn off your camera and call, or ask that one of the ledge council call you, right, Michael? I mean, we do have, if we can manage it ourselves, we do have access to, there's no prohibition to using electronics in the remote world.
Well, I don't know. It's just like being in the Senate room. You shouldn't be.
I've been enjoying my water.
Electronics. We should holler at each other. Go out the door and holler at each other. No, if you need to ask Michael something, do you have two units at home? So,
yes.
And Michael will be listening, and if he thinks you need help, just watch on your screen and he'll plug it in, I'm sure.
Yep. And I usually CC another member of the committee just in case, because reporters sometimes just don't have the time or don't get that attention on their screen. So another member of the committee can chime in if helpful.
There is usually about a minute lag though, so be aware of that from our discussion to the YouTube, which Michael.
I presume that Senator Bray is going to offer his amendment. It's not in the calendar though, so I guess he's going to share it somehow, describe it or share it with the Senate.
So I am supposed to be in Senate Natural right now to review their final amendment.
Yeah, that's fine, Michael. Thanks a lot for your time this morning. And they supposedly accepted our response to their amendment and going to add that in. We should be all set on that. The 102. I ran through some emails on my other iPad here. I see where the League of Cities and Towns come out against our bill, and they're worried, of course, those towns they wouldn't be able to get their school budget, wouldn't be able to get their town budget passed if the schools took all their money. And like they aren't gonna get any of this federal money.
Well, they are getting, towns are
Wow,
getting some, I think, but
300 million's going back to the towns.
it sounds like we are delaying I believe, Brian told us that. Sounds like maybe you and Jane should connect, Bobby, and see what we can offer to people to calm them down. Other than your stirring rhetoric, which will also help get them oriented about the $1,600 bills in their pocket.
1,600 million.
Worrying about spending $25. I mean, after all, it's gonna be the end of the world. I found
Maybe you should make it 160 bucks and Collmore's just asking for a
25
quarter.
cents.
He just wants a
Yeah.
quarter.
Oh,
But you can't spare a quarter for these kids?
Yeah, I mean, if you put it in perspective so people can really understand it, it's bull, it's total bull. And you have to do that sometimes because what the 1.6 billion, well, it's only a 1 and it's 0.6. That isn't very much. But you break it down to get it in real dollars that people can understand. Oh my God, that's what the difference is. But anyways, yeah, I'll have a chat with Jane. The other thing, Ag's going to be doing their 22 budget, and I thought we would probably have them in some morning to run through that for us as a committee. And also tomorrow at noontime, we've got that joint meeting with natural resources and with appropriations from the Lake Champlain crew. Usually they just come and talk to us in natural resources, but I guess they want to present to Propes as well. So they set it up for noon tomorrow. So we'll have to watch for that.
And there's also a joint session at 10:30 tomorrow, isn't there?
Yes. And we're going to do the raw milk bill, the first thing for a little bit in the morning. And we'll have some witnesses in on that. And then we go to the retention joint meeting with the House on the retention thing. And then we'll have probably a little break. I would hope a little break in between that and the noontime thing with Lake Champlain Advisory Committee. So why don't we take 20 minutes or so and then come back about 25 after to hear Julie's presentation on the Innovation Board.